من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as al-Awsat في السنن والإجماع والاختلاف لأبي بكر محمد بن إبراهيم بن المنذر rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah, who died in the year 318 after the Hijrah. And we're in the section of his book, Kitaab al-Tahara, or Kitaab al-Miyaah, the section of the book that is known as Kitaab al-Miyaah, or the section that deals with the different categories and the different types of water. And the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned the foundation in this, and that is that water is tahur. وأنزلنا عليكم من السماء ماء طهورا وينزل عليكم من السماء ماء ليطهركم به. Allah says, and we sent down upon you from above water that is tahur. And he said, and he sends down upon you water in order that you might purify yourself with it. So this is the foundation. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, we talked about some of the things that aren't mentioned in the book, some of the background information about the categories of water. And to recap that in summary, if we want to break it down into four major categories: water that is tahur, water that is pure and purifying; water that is tahir, water that is pure, and there is a disagreement regarding its purifying quality; water that is najis, water that is impure and non-purifying; and then that which is not water, right? Something that might be perceived as water, whether it be because it shares a name like ma'ul ward, rose water, or tree water, or something of the nature where water might be in the name, but the reality of it is that it is not water. Or it could be something that is not water because it has changed from its original name, like tea, like Kool-Aid, for example, nowadays, like soda, where the majority of the substance is water, but because of the physical or the chemical change that it has gone through, it's no longer entitled to the name of water anymore. So those are the four categories. And this chapter, for the most part, centers around identifying which of these four categories does any given body of water fall into, as well as what is the function of these different types or these four different categories. What category is the liquid that we are talking about? What category does it fall into of these four? Is it tahur? Is it tahir? Is it najis? Is it not water? In addition, what is the role of each of these four types? What does tahur water do? What does tahir water do? What does najis water do? And what does things that aren't water, do they have any functions or any roles or any effects that can be transitive to the one using them? And so this is the gist of the categories that we're going to talk about. And so the author, he talked about water that comes from the sea, right? After talking about certain waters that we know for sure are usable, he mentioned that there's disagreement about water that comes from the sea. And this is because the way the sea water in nature is perceived different than fresh water. And it seems to have another substance in it. And in reality, this is the crutch of the argument, right? If you're able to wrap your head around, we have to make wudu with water. The question is, if there is something else in the water, is the wudu that I've made with the water or with the something else? Right? If we have water that is mixed with another substance and I wash my arm, was the entirety of my arm washed with water, or are there parts of my arm that were washed with the other substance? Whether it be the salt, whether it be another liquid, whether it be something else that has taken away the absolute quality of water and now made it a restrictive or a qualified category of water. And that's why they talk about ma al-mutlaq, or absolute water. I know when I use quote unquote H2O to wash my arm, then the only substance that was on my arm is H2O. But if that H2O is mixed with something, does that mixture remove the nature or the absoluteness from that H2O to where maybe there's a portion of my arm that was washed or that was touched by some other substance where the water isn't what actually had the effect there, and then therefore my wudu is invalid. This is, even without it being necessarily articulated this way, this is the crutch of the argument. This is the basis of the whole disagreement in these issues. And one of the things, at least in my opinion, that makes it simple is to recognize that this is not something that the Sharia, like this exaggeration or this detailed investigation to the, to the extent where it's in this type of detailed and stringentness, this is not something that the religion looked at. And for that reason, when you look at the issue of salt water, which is where we started in this conversation, a person might say, well, salt water, seawater, is not absolute water. There's other substances. And for this reason, even some of the Sahaba questioned its permissibility. But the Sharia came to clarify that no, it's still water. And so that substance that is mixed with it doesn't remove it from being classified as water. Yes, we can call it seawater. Yes, we can call it salt water, right? But at the end of the day, it's still water. And so we don't have to be that stringent in trying to determine what type of water. As long as it is still pure in its nature and not najis. And so the author talked about all of the general types of water that we could use that we know are absolute, water that remains the way that Allah created it. And he talked about some of the scholars' opinion to the exception of seawater. And we mentioned another reason why some of the scholars disliked it, because of possibly the position of it being heated up by a fire. And we talked about how some of the scholars disliked the usage of warm or heated boiled water. And we talked about the different ways that water could be heated, whether it be by the sun, whether it be by a fire. And we talked about some of the difference of opinions about why they might dislike it. And after talking about that, the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's transitioning into another category. And that is the category of, he says, dhikrul wudu bin Nabeeth. What has been mentioned regarding making wudu with Nabeeth. And we purposely avoided translating the word Nabeeth because it needs to be understood what it is. A translation would not do the word justice, because the translation, everybody would want to just say wine. What is the ruling about making wudu with wine, with spirits, with alcohol? And this is not the meaning of the word Nabeeth in reality. Yes, it is one of the usages of the word, but Nabeeth is when you take a container of water and you submerge something into it, whether it be a date, raisins, honey, barley, whatever it may be, to give the water a flavor, right? You put something into the water in order that that substance mixes with the water to give it a flavor and to take on some of the qualities of what you submerged into it. But that action, under the right, or maybe if you want to say the wrong circumstances, can turn into an alcoholic beverage. When that substance of dates or raisins or barley or honey fermentates, gets heated up, and starts to change and go bad into the water, it can turn into a type of alcohol. And that process has to do with the way that it's stored and the way that it's heated and the environment that it's kept in. And so when it turns into that substance, they still call it Nabeeth, but it is now a Nabeeth that has an alcoholic content. It's now muskir. It's now something that is intoxicating. And so this mixture can go through stages. You have water, and then you submerge something into it. It's now called Nabeeth, because Nabeeth means to throw. So when you throw something in the water, you have made Nabeeth. You have made a flavored drink that is, for the most part, still water. It's just water with something in it. Lemon water, barley water, raisin water, date water, honey water, what a lot of us might have grew up on, sugar water, right? It's still water. It just has something else in it. So that's stage 2. It went from being absolute water to now being qualified water, i.e. water that has a restriction. You can't just call it absolute water. It's water with something else in it. Then, under the wrong circumstances, that restricted water that we're talking about, Nabeeth, can take on an alcoholic or an intoxicating quality and become wine. And that's what wine is, right? The 4th stage, which is, not part of our discussion right now, that wine can lose its intoxicating quality. After once being intoxicating, it can lose that intoxicating quality and turn into vinegar. Because all vinegar is a non-intoxicating wine, a vinaigrette, right? Wet red wine vinegar. All of these things are permissible because they have lost their intoxicating nature. So these are the stages that it can go through. And so the word Nabeeth is what is represented in those 2 middle stages. After it becoming absolute water and before becoming khal or vinegar, those 2 middle stages of when you put something into the water and it is now a flavored water, right? A date water. And then when they call it Nabeeth, they give it another name. As well as when it turns into its intoxicating state, they still give it the same name, Nabeeth, but it's no longer technically a water because now it has another nature. And so the conversation that is going to be discussed in this chapter is about those 2 middle categories. And if we understand this, then it will make it easier to understand perhaps some of the disagreement in it, and even perhaps to kind of navigate some of that disagreement. And so this chapter is about what has been related regarding making wudu with Nabeeth. Can we make wudu with Nabeeth? And so the author, he starts off with a principle. He says, أجمع أهل العلم أن الطهارة بالماء جائز. All of the people of knowledge are in unanimous agreement regarding that purification with water is permissible. If you have water and we can agree that it is water, and we could also say, to add to the author's agreement, if that water is tahor, if that water is pure and purifying, because there is disagreement about certain types of water. So if we have water that is water and that water is tahor, then there's unanimous agreement that it is permissible to use it in making a purification. That is our foundation. And it's important to understand foundations because one of the principles, ibqa ash-shay' ala ma kana alayh, leaving something the way that it was. If something was a certain way, then that's the way we should treat it, until it is no longer that way. And this is a branch of the major principle, al-yaqeen la yazalu bishak, or la yazulu bishak, right? Certainty is not, it does not leave because of doubt, or certainty is not done away with because of doubt. So if something was a certain way, we don't consider it to be something else unless we know that it has become something else. Leave it the way that it was. And if we're sure about something, then we don't deviate from our surety because of doubt and suspicion that has crept into the matter. And so this is why the foundation that he begins this chapter with is so important, that there is universal agreement, there is consensus, there is ijma' on the fact that if you have water, and we'll add the caveat that is tahur, then it is permissible to make wudu with it, or tahara in general, purification in general. And so the question is going to be, one, is Nabeeth water? That's our first question. Is Nabeeth water? If it is water, then what kind of water is it? Is it tahur? Is it tahir? Or is it najis? And like this, we see those four categories that we just mentioned coming into play. Is it tahur water? Is it tahir water? Is it najis water? Or is Nabeeth not even water to begin with? And once we establish what category it falls into, then we need to know what is the function of that category. If it's tahur water, then the author is giving us the foundation that we're basing on. If it's tahir water, then we need to see what are the statements about the role of tahir water in the religion. Does it become najis? And this is a possibility. Or is it not water in the first place, and so therefore it takes the ruling of every other liquid besides water? So this is the way that we approach this issue. We need to figure out what category it belongs to, and we need to figure out what is the function of that category. And like that's the cleverness of the author in his compiling of this information, right? Don't just think that they put these principles and these rules and these introductory points at the beginning of a chapter just to state the obvious, right? Somebody might ask themselves, the author starts this chapter off, the scholars have a consensus that it's permissible to make purification with water. Well, duh, right? Of course they do. But why would he start off with such an obvious point? It's to lay the foundation so that we can build from there. And it's not just stating the obvious. He lays another foundation for us to build off of. And this is a good scholarly tactic. Wallahi, when you begin, if you ever find yourself in the position of teaching, you want to like lay, or even in a debate, you want to lay down the foundations that the student or the opponent and yourself can build off of in the rest of the conversation. So everybody's not going their own way, and everybody's minds are wrapped around a point and they can always get back to it. So he lays down the first foundation, that the scholars, the people of knowledge, are in unanimous agreement that purification with water is permissible. He also says, وَأَجْمَعُوا عَلَى أَنَّ الْاغْتِسَالَ وَالْوُضُوءَ لَا يَجُوزُ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْأَشْرِبَةِ سِوَى النَّبِيذِ فَإِنَّهُمْ اخْتَلَفُوا فِي الطَّهَارَةِ بِهِ عِنْدَ فَقْدِ الْمَاءِ. He says they are also in agreement that taking a bath, or should I say washing, that washing or performing wudu, making a ghusl or a wudu, is not permissible with any drink, i.e. with any liquid, right? He calls it ashriba, and some people they refer to as al-Miyaah, right? Liquids. But it's not permissible with any drinkable substance, i.e. it's not permissible to make a ghusl or a wudu with any other drinkable substance besides water, they're in agreement, except as it relates to Nabeeth. As it relates to Nabeeth, then they are in disagreement regarding the purification that is done using it when there is no water, in the absence of water. So here are our two foundations. If it is water, and we added the caveat, tahor, right, just to be precise. And this is one thing that you'll notice about the consensus, the ijma'at, the consensuses that are mentioned by Ibn al-Mundhir. You'll notice two things. Sometimes you'll notice a very meticulous detailing, and that's in order that the consensus that is being transmitted can be accurate, because a lot of times there might be an exception that when you quote the consensus, you have to take into account that exception. And another thing you might notice, which is some of the things that they mention, is that a lack of detail where his consensus is not actually accurate. What he says there is universal agreement about, there's actually not a consensus about it because of the way that he detailed it. And that's one of those things that a student should always pay attention to. When somebody claims a consensus, how do we know that it is accurate and confirmed? Right? And that's a whole science in and of itself that can be studied, the details of it in usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals of fiqh. But the issue of establishing a consensus, it has steps and, a methodology to it. And it's not just simply somebody saying everybody agrees and then therefore we have to accept it as a consensus. And so one of the marks against Ibn al-Mundhir in his quoting of consensus at some times is that they're not detailed or precise. And so what you find out is that there isn't a consensus to the way that he said it. And this is an example of that. All of the people of knowledge are in agreement that purification with water is permissible, right? That's not the case, because there are types of water that are excluded from that. Najis water, it's not permissible to make purification from najis water. And we are all in agreement with that. So that's a separate consensus. Tahir water, there is disagreement as it relates to tahir water. Can we make a purification with that? Even some tahor water, right? I added the caveat of tahor water. You might need to add the caveat of tahor water that is mubah, permissible. Because there are certain tahor water that people disagree. Can you make a purification because of it? Like if it's stolen. Likewise, even if it's tahor and mubah, there's disagreement. Can everybody use it? Water that a woman used alone, can a man then thereafter use it? And so there's still disagreement in these things. And so even though he's saying that there's unanimous agreement that purification with water is permissible, that's not detailed enough to actually be accurate. But we get his point. That's the foundation. The foundation is that water with, wudu or tahara, purification with water is permissible. That's the foundation. And then the second foundation that he wants us to build off of in this issue is that any other liquid, any other drink, then it is not permissible to do a purification with it as it relates to removing hadith. So he says taking a ghusl or making wudu, which are the ways that we remove hadith, it is not permissible to do such with any other liquid, with any other drinkable substance. So anything that is not water, then you cannot remove hadith with it. And then the only thing that is the exception to that is Nabeeth. Can we use Nabeeth? طيب. He says they disagree about the permissibility of using Nabeeth in the absence of water. Right? If you don't have water or you can't use water, can you use Nabeeth? And all of this goes back to that ayat that we said you had to memorize, or those series of ayat in Surah al-Ma'idah, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا. And if you don't find any water, then seek out sa'idan tayyiba, clean earth. I make tayammum. And so Allah says, if you don't find any water, the alternative is tayammum. So this is why we say no other purification or no other liquid is suitable for purification, because it's not water. And this is why we say water is permissible for purification, because Allah says if you find any water. And now we get to the crutch of the issue, which is Nabeeth. Is it water or not? Here, the author, he says, فَقَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ لَا يَجُوزُ الْوُضُوءُ إِلَّا بِالْمَاءِ خَاصَّةً فَإِنْ لَمْ يَجِدِ الْمَاء تَيَمَّمْ لا يجزئه غير ذلك أو لا يجزئه غير ذلك. هذا مذهب مالك. وقال مالك لا يتوضأ بالنبيذ ونحوه. وكذلك قال الشافعي وأبو عبيد وأحمد بن حنبل ويعقوب. وكان الحسن يقول لا يتوضأ بلبن ولا نبيذ. He says, so a group of scholars, they say it is not permissible to make wudu with anything other than water exclusively. And if you don't find any water, or if any water can't be found, then make tayammum. And it is not accepted, i.e. in making purification, anything other than that. It is not accepted in the removal of hadith, anything other than that, i.e. anything other than water or tayammum. He says, and this is the madhab of Malik. And Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, wudu cannot be made with nabeeth or any other similar substance. And likewise, it was said by Ash-Shafi'i, as well as Abu Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Salam, as well as Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and Yaqub, Abu Yusuf, the companion of Abu Hanifa. And Al-Hasan, yani Hasan al-Basri, he said, wudu should not be made with milk or with nabeeth. Wudu should not be made with milk or with nabeeth. One thing I want you to notice, and this is a chapter that I like to go into detail with because it's an interesting chapter to get your feet wet in the issue of water. This first opinion, we notice that it seems that their theme is that they all consider nabeeth to not be water. And so, if nabeeth is not water, then the argument is over, right? And you see that in how Hasan al-Basri, he says, you can't make wudu with milk. Milk is not water, even though it's a pure, wholesome, blessed substance. Can't make wudu with it. And so, likewise, nabeeth, even if it is a good and wholesome substance, you can't make wudu with it. And their argument is because in their view, nabeeth is not water. And so they are not even considering the intoxicating quality of it, or is alcohol najis? Because that's another opinion. Some scholars say that alcohol is najis. And so if alcohol is najis and nabeeth is intoxicating, then this argument is out the window to begin with. But we don't even have to get that far because we have considered that that nabeeth is not water. Right? So our first argument is nabeeth is not water. طيب. He says, وَفِيهِ لِلْحَسَنِ قَوْلٌ ثَانٍ وهو أن لا بأس به وكره عطاء الوضوء باللبن وكره أبو العالية الاغتسال بالنبيذ. He says, and in this issue, Al-Hasan, he has a second opinion. And it is that there is no harm with doing so. There is no harm with doing so, i.e. making wudu. And is this statement applicable to leban or milk and nabeeth, or just nabeeth? Here, the author doesn't specify. nor have we at this moment read the statement of al-Hasan, nor is he going to bring the statement of al-Hasan in this book as it relates to what is this second opinion of al-Hasan. And this is important because in the previous opinion, the first opinion, he mentioned that Hasan says you can't make wudu with milk or Nabeeth. And then he says Hasan has a second opinion that is no problem. All right, what is no problem? Here is when you have to go back to the books to see who has transmitted Hasan's statement verbatim in order to correctly attribute to al-Hasan an opinion. Right? If I read this sentence, can I say that Hasan has no problem with making wudu with milk? Or making wudu with Nabeeth? Or making wudu with both of them? I need to know what al-Hasan said. And so in the footnotes, they give us a benefit. They say you can see the statement of Hasan in the book At-Tahur by Abu Ubaid. Abu Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Salam, he has a whole book dedicated to the statements of the Prophet and the Salaf as it relates to purification. So if you want to see what was said by al-Hasan in this issue, refer to that book and you can see the transmission according to Abu Ubaid's narrating of the information. And that is because this book, al-Awsat, as we mentioned, is a summarization. In spite of its vastness and its large size and the detail that it goes into, it is still a summarization of al-Mabsut and the summarization of Mabsut. And so it's a summarization of a summarization, potentially. And that just shows you the vast knowledge of the Salaf, how their summarizations were our encyclopedias. Without computers, without programs, without AI. And that's how our religion was preserved. Rijal, men, to the fullest extent of the word. فَرَحِمَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَجَزَاهُمْ عَنَّا خَيْرَ الْجَزَاءِ وَنَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ أَن يَجْمَعَنَا مَعَهُمْ فِي جَنَّاتِ الْفِرْدَوْسِ. Now, so he says, and there's a second opinion for al-Hasan, and it is that it is no harm in doing so. For now, because we haven't read the other opinion of Hasan, we'll just restrict it to the topic of Nabeeth without getting into the topic of milk. He says, so that Hasan has another opinion that there's no harm in doing so, i.e., there's no harm in making wudu with Nabeeth. There's no harm in doing so. He says, and Ata ibn Abi Rabah, he disliked making wudu with milk. He disliked it. It doesn't lead to the extent of him saying that the wudu was not accepted, possibly, but it's something that he did not prefer. He says, and likewise, Abu al-Aliyah, he disliked a ghusl with Nabeeth. So it's something that he disliked. And that's why he doesn't include it in other statements where they say it's impermissible, because they're stopping short of that. Kerihu, right? They disliked it. So we have the first opinion that it is acceptable. That it is not acceptable to make wudu or a ghusl with anything other than water. And then we have a second opinion that it is acceptable with milk and with Nabeeth. And so you see here, even here, Ibn al-Mundhir is contradicting the first thing that he mentioned where there's a consensus as it relates to everything besides Nabeeth. Some people say milk. Like al-Hasan al-Basri, potentially. And even Ata and Abu al-Aliyah only had a dislike. But we have to look at these actual statements. So that's the second opinion, that it is okay to use Nabeeth. What must they be saying if they say that it's okay to use Nabeeth? They must be saying, and this is how I choose to understand it, that Nabeeth is still water. And so if it hasn't changed its reality even if the name has changed, then it's still water. And this would be the difference between water with Pepsi in it or Pepsi with water in it. What's the difference? Water with Pepsi in it. You have a cup of water, or you have a cup, you drink some Pepsi in, you have your ice in it, you've drunk the Pepsi. There's still a little bit of Pepsi in the cup. And then you have somebody pour you some water in the cup. What is in the cup? There's water with Pepsi in it. That's clear. If anybody asks you, what are you drinking? You would say, I'm drinking water. They say, why it's so brown? Why does it look discolored like that? Oh, there was Pepsi in the cup before. So it's water with Pepsi in it. But everybody knows and everybody would agree that you're drinking water. As opposed to somebody who has Pepsi in a cup and then they put ice into the cup, or they have ice and they put Pepsi into the cup. And then the ice melts and now you have what? You have Pepsi with water in it. And so when you go to drink your Pepsi, it will taste flat. It will taste watered down. They'll say, why does this Pepsi taste this way? Oh, my ice must have melted and watered down the Pepsi. So now you have Pepsi with water in it. Everybody would agree you're drinking Pepsi, but it's just Pepsi that has been watered down. And so is there a difference between the two? Is there a difference between water with Pepsi in it and Pepsi with water in it? I say, I think there's a difference between the two. And I say that for me, this is the difference between the two positions. The way that I choose to look at it is that those who say that wudu with Nabeeth is permissible is because they're saying that the Nabeeth hasn't completely changed its nature. Yes, you have put something else into it, but it's still in the classification of water. It's just flavored water, water with a flavor. And so because of that, since it's still water, you can make wudu with it. You can take a ghusl with it. As opposed to when it turns into its alcoholic state, then it is no longer considered water anymore and has transitioned into alcohol. And this could be because it is najis or because it is no longer water, and thus back to the first argument as well. Now, just because I say that, does that mean that it's accurate? No, some scholars might make the argument that even if it has completely transitioned from water into this other drinkable substance that has this whole new name of Nabeeth, as long as it's still Nabeeth, the rule still applies. But that becomes problematic when we look at the argument for tea, because I don't know of anybody who makes the argument that tea is permissible to make wudu from. But you also have to ask the question, and this is actually a good question that I should have looked up. When did they start drinking tea? Right? Was that something that was known amongst the Arab to drink tea during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And a person might think that that question is foolish. Come on, it's tea. But from the things that a lot of people are shocked to find out is that they didn't know what rice was. Right? They didn't find out what rice was until doing battle against the Persians. And they found rice. And so they were worried that it could be poison, as some of them mentioned. And so, like, knowing the histories of these things, because is the ruling of Nabeeth applicable to tea? It's a question that should be asked. But in any circumstance, this is a second opinion, that it is okay to use Nabeeth. And some people don't go as far as saying okay, but they say makruh, disliked. He says, وروينا عن ابن عباس أنه سئل عن الوضوء باللبن فقال لا يتوضأ باللبن إذا لم يجد الماء أحدكم إذا لم يجد الماء أحدكم فليتيمم بالصعيد. He says, and it has been reported to us on the authority of Ibn Abbas that he was asked about making wudu with milk. And we see now he's kind of merging these two categories, the category of Nabeeth and the category of milk. And milk is an important argument as it relates to things that are not water. While Nabeeth, the argument is about things that could potentially be water. And so we see that there's a little bit of overlap that isn't relevant to each other, right? Meaning that if we negate the use of milk, it doesn't necessarily translate to the negation of Nabeeth. But from the aspect of those who say that Nabeeth is a different liquid, no longer considered to be water, in that regard, it's translatable. It's comparable. So he says that it's been reported to us on the authority of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, that he was asked about making wudu with milk. And so he said, wudu should not be made with milk. If one of you does not find any water, then he should seek out earth, dirt, sa'id, right? That which is from the surface, the crust of the earth, i.e. to make tayammum. This is what he mentions on Ibn Abbas. What's the proof? He says, حدثنا محمد بن نصر قال حدثنا يحيى بن يحيى قال قرأت على الشريك عن مرزوق عن سعيد بن جبير عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما فذكر ما تقدم عنه. He says that Muhammad ibn Nasr narrated to us. He said that Yahya ibn Yahya narrated to us. He said that I read upon Sharik on the authority of Marzuq, on the authority of Sa'id ibn Jubair, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, and he mentions that which has already transpired from him, that the narration that we've already mentioned. طيب. This is the second opinion, right? The first opinion is no with any other liquid. The second opinion is yes with wine and with milk. So we'll alter the opinion of Hasan al-Basri to include both for the second opinion. And that's what it seems like the author is implying, even though we haven't read it specifically in Kitaab al-Tahur. But then, in addition to the yes to both, there are some caveats. Some people say it's disliked to use milk. Some people say it's disliked to use wine. And Ibn Abbas says it's haram to use milk, or you cannot use milk, right? So it's still all in the yes category, just with different examples. And that's how we're to understand this category. That's why it's not a third, fourth, and fifth category. It's just position number one, no, for anything other than water. Position number two, yes, specifically for milk and wine, or milk and Nabeeth. While some of them say, I don't like milk, and others say, I don't like Nabeeth, and others say, milk is a no. But they're all still in the somehow, some way, yes category. Type. This yes category, how do they get this opinion when Allah says, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً, if you don't find any water, then seek out clean earth? The answer, the author says, وَقَدْ رُوِينَ عَنْ عَلِيٍّ بِإِسْنَادٍ لَا يَثْبُتْ أنه كان لا يرى بأسا بالوضوء بالنبيذ وبه قال الحسن والأوزاعي. He says, and it's been reported to us on the authority of Ali with the chain that is invalid, that is not confirmed, that he didn't have any problem with making wudu with Nabeeth. And this was the view of Hasan al-Basri, as well as al-Awsat. And as the author is going to talk about, it's because of a hadith that is inauthentic, and we'll see it, right? When the Prophet was asked he asked for some water, and Ibn Mas'ud, he said, I only have some Nabeeth. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, a good fruit and a pure substance, or a pure water. And so he made wudu with it. At the end of the day, the way that I choose to give the excuse to those who hold this opinion is that it must be before the Nabeeth completely loses its quality of being water. Now, is that what everybody says? No. Somebody might say as long as it's Nabeeth, whether it is water with a date in it, right, or water with honey in it, or water with sugar in it, or if it has completely transitioned over to another drink, as long as it's still called Nabeeth, then it's permissible. That is what some people might say. But for me, I choose to say that those who held that position, perhaps they are holding that position when the Nabeeth was still in its water state without completely transitioning into something else. And so therefore their opinions can be valid because it's still technically water before it transitioned into something else. But once it transitions into Dr. Pepper, which, you know, is Nabeeth, right? What are those secret ingredients in Dr. Pepper, right? What are those flavors that you're tasting? It's just Nabeeth with carbonation in any circumstance. So those are the two opinions. And even though it's reported that Ali had that opinion, it's unconfirmed. But it is confirmed to be one of the views of al-Hasan as well as al-Awsat, who was one of the madhahib that were followed, right? Who was Abdurrahman ibn Amr al-Awsat. Naam. طيب, that's two positions. The third position, he says, and we'll just get through the positions today, and then next time we'll cover the discussion between it. He says, وَقَالَ الطَّائِفَةِ النبيذ وضوء لمن لا يجد الماء وروي هذا القول عن عكرمة وقال إسحاق إن ابتلي توضأ بالنبيذ حلوى كما وصف أبو العالية تمرات ألقيت في الماء حتى غير اللون فهو أحب إلي من التيمم وجمعهما أحب إلي. This statement gives some clarity to what I was mentioning about what I said as far as the way I choose to perceive the issue. He said there's a third position. So the first position is that no, absolutely. The second position is, for the most part, yes, absolutely, right? Whether it be yes with a dislike or yes, except milk, right? Or just yes, absolutely. So even if you have water, you can still use Nabeeth. This third position, he says, in a group of scholars, they say Nabeeth is the wudu, or should I say the wadu. It's the wudu liquid, the wadu with the fatha. And Nabeeth is the wadu for whoever does not find any water. And this view was the statement of Ikrimah, right? If you don't have any water, before going to make tayammum, no, use Nabeeth. So they make it a medium ground, a middle ground. Now, and as I said, I like to go into detail into this topic because it's a good issue to get your feet wet in the topic of water, to understand all of its different categories. This argument is the weakest. If you say it is water, then I should be able to use it whenever I want. And if you say it isn't water, then you need to provide me a proof that I can use it at all. But to say that I can use it in the absence of water, then this argument holds less ground, except as it relates to being cautious. I'm not sure, is it water or not? And so I won't use it willingly up front. But in the absence of water, I'll use it because maybe it is water. But what about if it isn't? I'll make tayammum as well. And like this, you see the next statement he says, Ishaq, and I'm assuming that this is Ishaq ibn Rahuya. He says that if an individual is afflicted, right, it's a trial that he finds himself in, a turmoil that he finds himself in, where he has to use Nabeeth to make wudu, then let it be sweet Nabeeth. A Nabeeth before it becomes intoxicating. Hilwa. It can't get that bitter bite of alcohol to it. Because once it transitions into alcohol, can it still be considered water? Because water is non-alcoholic. At this stage, we know that it's something else. Once it becomes something else that we know for sure, then we can't make wudu with it. And once it becomes alcoholic, intoxicating, we know for sure it's not water because there is no intoxicating water. Additionally, there's the argument about is alcohol najis or not. But the reality of it is that that argument is not necessary here. So for those of them who try to make this issue an issue of purity versus impurity, that's not the argument. The argument is it water or not? And once it becomes bitter, once it has that bite, it's no longer water for sure. But when it still has that sweet taste of just the fruit or the substance that is mixed with the water, is it still water or not? So Ishaq, he says, if the individual is inflicted, then he should make wudu with Nabeeth as long as it's still sweet, as was described by al-Aliyah. al-Aliyah, the author, he mentioned him in the previous position. But he said that he used to dislike making a bath with Nabeeth. What was al-Aliyah's statement? al-Aliyah, he said, it's just a couple of dates that have been thrown into the water until it changed the water's color. The reality of it, it's water with dates in it. So it's still water, but it just has some dates in the water that have changed the water's color. And that is more beloved to me than making tayammum. I would rather use discolored water than make tayammum, because discolored water is still what? Still water. And it's not najis, and it's still water. So that is more beloved to me than making wudu, or should I say making tayammum, because Allah says if you don't find any water, and I found water, and so I prefer doing that than making tayammum. And so that is the aspect of why al-Aliyah disliked using Nabeeth. But it shows us that he still considered it to be water. He says, al-Aliyah, but gathering between the two is more beloved to me than even that. Because to make wudu with this water that has dates in it, that has changed its color, I'm still in doubt. Has it changed its reality or not? Is it water with dates in it? Or is it a different drinking or drinkable substance altogether? When does water with a leaf in it become tea? At what point does the water transition from being water with a leaf in it to becoming tea? That's a hard thing to know, right? It's not like we have a stopwatch and at 13 seconds, it transitions over. And so because of this unsurety that I have, this insecurity, or this not being sure about the reality of this liquid, I prefer to get, this is al-Aliyah, I prefer to gather between the two actions. I'll use it because it's possibly still water, but I'll make tayammum because it's possibly not. And from the aspect of being cautious, this is sensible. But is it something that we can command a person with? It becomes problematic when it comes from the aspect of telling somebody what to do, because there's no circumstance in the religion where Allah told us to gather between both actions. Either make wudu or make tayammum. If the substance that you have is eligible for wudu to be made, then make wudu. And if not, then make tayammum. But this is from the sincerity and the caution of the Salaf, that they would say, I'll use it because it's still water. But I'm unsure about its nature, so I'll make tayammum too to be on the safe side. And it's just the touching on the ground and the wiping of the face. It doesn't hurt much. And so this is why it's a third opinion, because they leaned towards it only being used in the absence of water because of the doubt that they have about it actually being water. And so this would mean that it's part of the tahir category. And this is why scholars say that some of them who hold the view, right, that there is a third category of water, not just tahor and not just najis, but the third category being tahir, and that is that water that is no longer purely water. And so if I make wudu with that substance that is tahir, am I actually using water or not? And so in that circumstance, you'll find some of them saying no, and some of them saying yes. And for that reason, some of them say just don't do it to avoid the argument. Like, that's the third opinion. And we're coming to a close. He says, حدثنا إسماعيل قال حدثنا أبو بكر قال حدثنا أبو معاوية عن الحجاج عن أبي إسحاق عن الحارث عن علي أنه كان لا يرى بأسا بالوضوء بالنبيذ. Here he brings the isnad to that narration that he attributed to Ali, that he said is unconfirmed. It's unestablished. It's weak. And so even though it's weak, you should know about it. People use it as their argument. The Ahnaf, right? They are the ones who hold this view, this madhab, that it's permissible to use. Even though he should have mentioned this after the second opinion, he mentions it here after the third opinion. He says it's been reported that Ismail narrated to us. He said that Abu Bakr narrated to us. He said that Abu Muawiyah narrated to us on the authority of al-Hajjaj, on the authority of Abi Ishaq, on the authority of al-Harith, on the authority of Ali, that he used to not see any harm in making wudu with Nabeeth. And the weakness in it is Hajjaj ibn Arta and al-Harith. The verifier mentions that both of them have weakness in them. He attributes that statement to Ad-Dar al-Qutni. But let's finish up today with the fourth position, and perhaps it's the final position in this issue, right? And then after that will be the conversation of the discussion of these opinions. He says, وَفِيهِ قَوْلٌ رَابِعٌ قَالَهُ النُّعْمَانِ لا يجزئ أن يتوضأ بشيء من الأشربة إلا بالنبيذ التمر وحكي عنه أنه قال ليس له أن يتوضأ بنبيذ الزبيب والعسل ولا بأس بسائر الأنبذة ووافقه الزفر على مقالته. وقال محمد بن الحسن يتوضأ به ثم يتيمم what am I talking about? يتيمم. وقول محمد هذا قول خامس. ولماذا? طيب, he says, and there is a fourth position, and it is what was said by An-Nu'man, yani Abu Hanifa, An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. He said, not An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, no, An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abu Hanifa. I was thinking about Nu'man ibn Bashir, but now, An-Nu'man, yani Abu Hanifa, he says, it is not permissible or is not accepted to make wudu with any other drink, i.e. besides water, except the nabeeth that is made with dates. So while the first opinion says no, absolutely, and the second opinion says yes, absolutely-ish, and the third opinion says only in the absence of water, the fourth opinion says you can only use it if it's this type of nabeeth, the nabeeth that is made using dates. Why? As we mentioned, the hadith that we're going to come to, it's the type of nabeeth that is mentioned in that narration. So it's the only exception. So it's as if he's saying, no, nabeeth is a different substance other than water. It's as if this opinion has excluded nabeeth from water. So while the first opinion says nabeeth is not water, and so therefore the answer is no. And the second opinion says nabeeth is water. Or even if it isn't, it's okay, comparing it to milk as well. And the third opinion is, maybe it's water, maybe it's not. It's better to be on the safe side and use it. It's as if this fourth opinion is saying it is not water. That's why you can't use any other Nabeeth. But because there's a hadith that mentions the Nabeeth of dates, then it's acceptable. And this from the Ahnaf is very strange based on their principles. Because the Ahnaf, they will not use the Sunnah to qualify the Quran. Right? They believe that making an exception, a takhsis, is a naskh, is an abrogation. It's removing the ruling. And they don't believe that the Sunnah can abrogate the Quran. And so they don't believe that the Sunnah can make an exception or have an addition to the Quran. Right? And so for this reason, when they say that you can use the Nabeeth of dates, their foundation in that is the Sunnah. And it has to be that they're not saying Nabeeth is water, otherwise you could use any Nabeeth. And so it's as if they're making an exception based on the Sunnah that contradicts what the Quran says. And so this from them is strange from that approach, right? And for the one who studies fiqh, he'll notice it. This is just one example of how sometimes a person will contradict their own principles, right? And this in the issues of argumentation and jidal and things like that, munadhara, it's an important skill to recognize when somebody contradicts their own principles, because you can establish the argument against them using their opinion, even if it's not necessarily accurate. And this is something that helps the student understand when they read certain books, how a scholar might use something that they don't necessarily agree with just to establish the argument against their opponent. In any circumstance, the fourth position is the opinion that was stated by an-Nu'man, and it is that it is not allowable or it is not acceptable to make wudu with any other liquid, i.e. besides water, except the Nabeeth that is made from dates. And it has been transmitted from him that he said, it is not for an individual to make wudu with Nabeeth that is made from raisins or honey, nor and there's no harm in any of the other anbida. So he excludes honey and raisins in one opinion, but says everything else is allowable. And so if that is his opinion, then you might be able to make the argument that he's saying it is water, and therefore not going against their foundation of the Quran for the Sunnah, but excluding honey and raisins would be from the aspect of how quick those things turn into alcohol. Because perhaps honey and raisins turn into alcohol much quicker than the other ones. And their alcoholic nature can be overlooked and not recognized because of how sweet they'll still taste. And you'll find this to be partially the case, or what some of them say the case, the reason why the Prophet ﷺ forbade mixing dates and raisins together. When you have water, can you put dates and raisins in it together and mix it? As a Nabeeth, the Prophet forbade this. And some of them say the reason behind it is because it makes it intoxicate quicker, and that intoxicating nature is hidden due to the sweetness of the substance. So perhaps Abu Hanifa is saying that no, Nabeeth is water, which would be similar to the second position, but he's excluding raisins and honey. While the first one is more restrictive. It's a no to it all except raisin. But the second view of Abu Hanifa is what Zufr agreed with him in. Zufr is another Hanafi scholar from the young companions of Abu Hanifa. He agreed with Abu Hanifa in the usage of Nabeeth except honey and raisins. While Abu Yusuf who was one of the close companions of Abu Hanifa, he disagreed. He said, no, you can't use any Nabeeth, as we mentioned. Now, there's another companion of Abu Hanifa known as Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, right? One of the main compilers of the madhab. He said the individual should make wudu and then make tayammum. And so this position is very similar to the position of Abu al-Aliyah. But here, Ibn al-Mundhir, he says in this statement from Muhammad is actually a fifth statement. And so, however you decide to categorize, why didn't he make Abu al-Aliyah's statement a separate statement? Right? It doesn't matter how you categorize it. You see the overlap in these issues. Absolutely no. Absolutely-ish, yes. Right? Comparing it, including with it milk, or doing it with a dislike like Abu al-Aliyah, or with a dislike to milk, or yes with the no to a milk. That's the second opinion. But it has all of these sub-opinions. Then you have 3 only in the absence of water. And you can add to that the view of Abu al-Aliyah, and you can add to that adding tayammum to it. And then you can carry this opinion of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan back to that opinion. And then you have a 4th opinion, which is only with the Nabeeth of dates. Or you can flip it and say, yes, as long as it's not raisins or honey. And so these are the main opinions. But to simplify it all, and we've gone long today, but so we'll stop here. To simplify it all, it just boils down to, we have 4 categories. Tahor water. If the water is absolutely water, make wudu. Najis water. If the water has become najis, don't make wudu. And if you say that alcohol is najis, then you can't make wudu with Nabeeth if it's alcohol, case closed. Then we have tahir water and not water. If you say Nabeeth is tahir water, then what do you say about tahir water? Is it a category that is recognized in the religion that is separate from tahor water and therefore not permissible that purification be made with it? Then the moment it's tahir, because it has changed its taste, color, or smell because of something tahir, it's no longer water in your eyes or absolute water, and so therefore no purification is made. Where if you say that even if its taste, color, or smell has changed because of something tahir, it's still water, then therefore purification is made. But if you say that Nabeeth has changed so much that it is no longer water, then purification is not made. And if you're unsure and you kind of think it's still water, but maybe it's changed too much, make wudu and make tayammum. These are the opinions in this issue, and we can see that it's not even really a disagreement. It's just a different perspective of what the reality of this substance is. And so next time, inshallah, we'll look at the discussion around this topic that is presented by the author and which position he supports the most. But in reality, as I mentioned, my opinion is that none of these positions are actually in contradiction to each other, except from the aspect of preference and being on the safe side, and the aspect of perception. What do you think the substance is? هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. A quick note, I've gone back to working over the road, and so classes will be, or not classes, readings will be more sporadic and in different conditions. But inshallah, we'll try to continue, because as we mentioned, our goal is just to get this information translated. You know, readings like today aren't the norm, right? Today we went into detail about things because of my enjoyment of the issue, but our goal is to mostly translate. So we'll try to stick with that even while we're on the road. Naam, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wash my hands with soap after washing my feet for wudu. Is there anything wrong? There's nothing wrong with washing your hands with soap. The issue would be, can you make wudu with soapy water? But for you, you mentioned after making wudu, so the wudu is over, right? Using soap and water, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, does it nullify the effectiveness of the water as it relates to purification for the removal of hadith? Right? You use soap to get rid of bacteria and to get rid of germs, not to make wudu, not to take a ghusl, which is the removal of hadith. So does soap alter that? And it comes down to the same category. Is soapy water still water, or has it transitioned to becoming tahir water, to where there's a disagreement about that? We know it's not najis. Or has it transitioned so much that it's not even soapy water anymore? It's now just soap. Like, for example, if you get a liquid soap, it might have a high water content, but it's not the same as soapy water, as the water in the tub that has soap in it, as opposed to a liquid soap that is, made from a water. So that's where the whole arguments come down to. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ustad, in the previous lesson, you said that Nabeeth is included amongst the intoxicants. Right, when it transitions over from being the water that has a substance added to it, it can become an intoxicant. Just like after it's an intoxicant, it can become non-intoxicating when it turns back into vinegar. But it goes through those stages that we mentioned at the beginning: water, then Nabeeth non-intoxicating, then Nabeeth intoxicating, and then if left long enough, the intoxication will fall away and it will turn into vinegar. Ameen wa iyyakum wa ahsanallahu ilaykum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.